This is Scorched Vine, a Vin Noir's production of Hope's Nocturne, Chapter 5, Hope's Unexpected Encounters, written by OPL Noir, performed by Carrie Storm. Hope's Unexpected Encounters. The van's back door opened to a rush of fresh air and a blue craftsman house surrounded by a sea of green grass. Manos's sister had already been there, and while he only lived 2 blocks away, this was the first time seeing the house. The houses in this part of town were all single-story bungalows built just after the Second World War. Like his grandmother's, they all had kitchens and bathrooms in the back, and living rooms and 2 bedrooms in the front. However, someone had added dormers and port windows to the roof of this one and given them twice the yard. He noticed this must have been one of the first ones built. Manos paused at the back gate, admiring the curves of the windows and the warm, inviting light pouring from them. It was early evening. With the sunlight diminishing, the yellow light from the windows seemed to pull at something inside him. Have I been here before? He wondered. Stepping through the back gate and onto the well-manicured lawn, Manos stopped. This wasn't his house, his yard, his lawn, and the one connected to them was once again plastered to his back. It's a Dutch door, and at this hour, the top half will be open if my dad's at home, Amanda whispered, nudging him on. Wait a minute. Did she just nudge me? He scowled when he heard his buddies chuckling from behind. Scowling, Manos briefly considered walking slower or flipping around, positioning Amanda ahead of him. He pressed on, however, moving forward despite her fist in the small of his back. The diminishing sunlight also meant that they needed to deliver her home and leave as quickly as possible. If they were going to pick up any odd jobs this evening, they needed to leave now. There was no time for arguments, and a discussion about personal space and boundaries would have to wait for another day. With job opportunities foremost on his mind, he pulled up short upon seeing the half-open door and the man framed in it. His face, which looked at odds with his salt and ginger hair, was too odd to ignore. Skin that was weathered from a life spent baking in the sun should be red, considering his red hair. But this bear of a man filling the doorway in his blue overalls looked almost as dark as Manos. Deep furrows scored their way from the corners of his eyes to the hollows of his heavily shadowed cheeks, where dimples sat tentatively as if unsure of their position on his face. Full lips smirked at them as his nose deviated from the straight path, pointing in the opposite direction. Are we at the right house? Manos wondered. This can't be her father. Good evening, the giant rumbled, nodding at him and the others. How are you boys doing? And who's your new friend, Peter? He asked. His gravelly voice reverberated through the air. This man sounds as if he gargles with asphalt every morning. Manos shivered. The sound brought back the memory of a nursery rhyme from deep within the annals of his past. Good thing I'm mostly Cameroonian and French, with not a drop of English blood. Reaching forward with an embarrassingly shaky hand. Hello, sir. My name is Manos Sabine. He introduced himself. Evening, Mr. Prescott. We're just returning one of your belongings, Peter interjected, reaching behind Manos and pushing Amanda forward. The elder Prescott frowned as he grasped Manos's hand with both of his. Taking in the state of his daughter, the giant growled. Manos noticed how firm, rough, and tough those hands were. Tough enough to break bones, and yet warm. Please, I know how this looks, but don't break my bones, he thought, squirming under the giant's intense glare and handshake. I'm not the one responsible for the bruise on her face. So, you're Macon's son, the elder Prescott smiled when he tore his glare away from his daughter. Yes, sir, Manos squeaked. I was so sorry to hear about your mom, Prescott offered, still holding Manos's hand. And I'm Lionel. Thank you, sir, Manos managed, squirming slightly as Amanda elbowed his sore ribs. Lionel frowned down his nose at his youngest, which, considering its detour, Manaus thought made him look cross-eyed. He sighed, opened the bottom half of the Dutch door, and watched her slow, silent progress across the threshold. "Were you going to hide behind Manaus for the rest of the evening?" Lionel asked, as she took a step past him. Manaus squirmed again, wondering if he shouldn't mention that her bruises weren't from him. When he paused and scowled up at her father, he wondered if he would have to stand and fight, or be pummeled to be more accurate, or run. It wasn't just that he found the situation awkward, but also that the man who looked like he crushed bones without thinking twice about it was currently engaging in an epic stare down with Amanda. Just before Manaus opened his mouth to diffuse the situation, he heard her harumph, then glanced at her. Squeaky actually stomped, he thought, as he gazed with an open mouth. "Oof!" the older Prescott hissed at his daughter. "Angry with me? Honor dictates that I step in and lend aid," Manaus thought, pausing mid-step. "But maybe I should see where this is headed." Lionel heaved a sigh, smiling down affectionately at his attacker. Manaus's shoulders sagged, relieved he wouldn't have to step in. His heart gave an uncomfortable squeeze when Lionel lifted her chin. His fingers gently stroked the bruise under her eye. "Young Henry?" Lionel asked between clenched teeth. Amanda nodded. "Go clean up. I'll get some ice. Maybe we can get some of the swelling down before your mother comes home." Manaus glanced at Peter, who then nodded in agreement as Amanda scurried past her father. They would be exploring the subject of young Henry in depth later on. The surreptitious exchange took place as an unsuspecting Lionel ruffled his daughter's curls as she hurried past. "Dad," Amanda complained, swatting her father's hand and ducking his attempt at a second swipe. Manaus didn't know who this young Henry was. However, after acquiring the necessary information from Peter, he was certain young Henry would know who he was. "You don't put your hands on girls," he thought, as an image of Marie's swollen eyes flashed through his mind. "A little bird told me you won the Borrego scholarship," Lionel mentioned. "Don't mention it, Dad," Amanda yelled from somewhere within the house. "We don't talk about that." "My apologies." Lionel bowed toward Manaus, looking slightly chagrined. "Is she always this," Manaus started, "outspoken?" Lionel finished for him as the others laughed. "Well, yes," Manaus confessed, offering the elder Prescott a sheepish smile. "I'm afraid so. So be forewarned. There's no head-to-mouth filter. She was born with an opinion on everything and an argument on the tip of her tongue." He chuckled. "Please, come in," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't stay," Jock interrupted. "We were about to pick up additional work." Lionel smiled as he propped his elbow against the bottom half of the open door. "I see the others from beyond the Pillars of Jat are still active," he observed, as his smile broadening. "Come on in, boys," he insisted, widening the gap so that they could enter easily. "By the way," he closed the door behind them, "you boys didn't think you were the first to call yourselves Jat, did you? Anyway, you did me a huge service by bringing my stray dumpling home. I would have had to scour the streets searching for her." Pulling out a wad of bills from his pocket, he offered it to Jock. Following closely on Peter's heels, Manaus slipped inside. They didn't make it very far. Unable to move any further, they stood, huddled in a line, between the door, kitchen table, and stairs. Between the appliances, island, cabinetry, and table, the space was crammed. As soon as Manaus got over the abundance of mahogany covering almost every surface, the scent of lavender and medicinal herbs hit him like a ton of bricks. He shook his head to dislodge the overpowering smell. "Is this what the inside of a ship's hull looks like?" Manaus considered, knowing the man was some sort of ship's captain. "I wonder how hard it would be to do something like this in Grant's house." So, which one of you is playing fly half this year? Lionel asked from his perch on the edge of the table. They only stood a mere foot from him, elbow to elbow between Peter and Jock. Manos felt crowded. Every corner had something. Even the ledges close to the ceiling was crammed with pots, pans, and weeds. Manos frowned, gaping up at the plants hanging from the pot rack. Lavender, eucalyptus, and shadow benny hung from hooks on the ceiling. Her father fit in the corner between the door and the table, his cigar in the saucer next to his tea, both within reach. He glanced down at the little table propped against the wall. He thought for a minute, not really paying attention to the conversation around him. This room also smells of cherries and chocolate, just like your daughter. She obviously spends most of her time with you. She doesn't smell of perfume like the other girls, but cherries and chocolate. He smiled. This place was making him hungry. What about you, David? Are you going to follow in your big brother's footsteps? Lionel asked, smiling at said brother, Peter. Not on your life, Peter bellowed, jostling Manos out of his reverie with his arm movements. Dad will have my head if he even thinks about playing. David, who'd been closest in their little tight line to the back of the door, hung his head. Jock chuckled, and Manos tried very hard not to laugh out loud. The subject had been a point of contention between the brothers and their father. No, Mr. P., David said, answering for himself. Dad and Peter are vehemently against me playing. Well, they would want what's best for you, Lionel considered. But what about you, Manos? Do you have a preference? On which playing position? Manos asked. He'd been too busy looking around and missed the question. Yes, son, Lionel laughed. Well, I know everyone wants to be number 10, but I think I'd prefer 13's position. Loose forward, Lionel frowned, pursing his lips. I know, Manos smiled, and the others openly laughed. I'm a little on the larger side for that position. It's Grand's. Yeah, you are, Jock interjected, agreeing as he bent over laughing. Cooking, Manos finished, scowling at his cackling friends. Why not fullback? You would make an excellent 15. You've got the build for it. Lionel pointed out, gesturing at his frame. Number 15 spot. Manos winced. The room quieted. I'd have to pack on more weight. Lionel nodded. You've got some time. His smile broadened, his eyes becoming wistful as he sighed. You look so much like her. My mom? Manos frowned, looking down at his forearms. Lionel laughed. Yes, you were definitely blessed with her beautiful warm chocolate skin. Lionel's expression changed, and he reached out as if to touch Manos. I know that's what everyone sees. He sighed, withdrawing his hands. As they should. She left you with a beautiful gift, but you have so much more than that. He smiled again, this one wistful and not reaching his eyes. She had the most amazing eyes. He glanced up at the ceiling as if seeing a fresco of her eyes emblazoned across it. Eyes that seemed to see past everything, into a person's soul. He said, crossing his arms, collecting himself as uncomfortable minutes dragged on. Heaving a heavy sigh, he continued, I know this sounds foolish, but you do have her eyes. While they are gray like your dad's, they're shaped like hers. Manos didn't know how to respond to that. Most people took one look at him and saw his dad. But for his color, that was. It was odd for anyone to see his mom in him. He hung his head. With all the talk about his mom and the memories of her, the loss was too close to the surface. They brought you here once or twice, Lionel stated, his tone a little lighter, his voice less husky. Manos sniffed, blinking back tears. Did they? He asked, his voice choked, echoing off the walls across the quiet room. Pull yourself together, man. You'll never hear the end of it if they see you cry. Manos shook himself. Yes, Lionel answered. You weren't quite 4 yet. But you had the most adorable chubby legs I'd ever seen. You were toddling along in a blue sailor suit, as fast as your little feet would take you. The room erupted in frantic laughter. The idea of Manos running in a little sailor suit broke the tension. Apparently, Manaus hadn't been the only one made uncomfortable by the direction the conversation had taken. If I recall correctly, I believe my mom took one look at you and declared, "You looked good enough to eat." She then opened the oven and threatened to bake you. Once the raucous laughter died down, he continued, "I think you'll make an excellent 13, if that's what you want. But I'm rooting for 15, he said. This has been the 5th chapter of Hope's Nocturne. Hope's Unexpected Encounters. If you'd like to know which number Manaus chooses, you could buy the book at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Otherwise, tune in again next Thursday to find out what happens next.